Open University.
Guten Tag, Klaus. I was going to talk in German for this episode of Open University, and I did try, im fremden Sprache zu sprechen, aber first of all, the ratings would be very low for it, and secondly, it'd be mostly hesitation phenomena, as the linguists say, because I would be fishing around desperately, lashing around for the correct vocabulary, realizing it wasn't there, and then reaching for paraphrases and integrating, French words into German, which might be there, might not be there, and that would have been boring for you and frustrating for me. But it's an interesting frustration, fremde Sprache, the foreign language, and I would liken it to certain artistic states or even dream states when you have a half competence. Let's face it, all of us at some point, at pretty much every point, have a half competence or a partial competence and things, because none of us are perfect. None of us has reached the culmination. You can't really ever reach the end of a language. You always know only a certain clump, a bunch of vocabulary. And that in itself is an interesting limitation, because it makes you think about, the fact that language does dictate and define what you can say and what you can think and even what you can remember. I think psychologists are discovering increasingly that children only start remembering from the period at which they acquire language. That's really weird, because we're seeing things, we surely have visual memories and smell memories and all sorts of other memories, but actually if you don't have the words to sort of anchor them into your memory, they tend to vanish. So, but also secondly, when you're half competent at something, you tend to see its opacity better. And what I mean by that is that you see language as an object. So when I'm reading my German books, I've got lots of them actually just around the corner there. What I like about only half understanding them is that I have to see the German language itself as a kind of art object. I see its materials. I see its weird Zs and, the whatever you call that, the S, which is actually not an S but looks more like a B. The sort of arcane and Gothic quality it has. It has an itselfness, a kind of thisness, which other languages don't have for me, because they simply become windows through which I peer at the world or a model of the world or something, which itself is a huge question. I'm going to, in fact, just grab a German book at random, and it's Peter Handke Kaspar in one of my beloved Surkamp paperbacks with their super simple single-colored sleeves, jackets. So, während Kaspar spricht, sprechen die Einsager, ohne ihn unverständlich zu machen. Der Einsager, the one-sayer, I don't know what that's about, but poor Caspar is a very solitary fellow who doesn't really use language. Famously, his story is that he doesn't use language until he is brought into civilization, because was he raised by wolves? I can't remember his story exactly, Caspar, but he's solitary and doesn't know any humans until he's at least 10 or something, as I recall. So we all of us need language to perceive, and the language we use does actually really filter the kind of perceptions we have. I also ask myself, could I be a German? I mean, I'm interested in, I think you have to stay open and curious about languages, but part of that process of acquisition of language is all about wanting to projecting oneself into that country and saying, could I be a German citizen? This has become a super pressing question, a real question, following the Brexit thing and the fact that I'll be stripped very shortly of my European citizenship. I am a European, that is one of my core identities. The other is that I'm a Scot. I would love to be a Scot in Europe. If that's going to happen, that would be the perfect solution. But otherwise, I might have to become a German in Europe, or a kind of Ersatz-German. The interesting thing is that I actually identify when I'm in Germany with Ersatz-Germans, with non-Germans who are living in the German state, and particularly in Berlin. We have this alternative kind of vision of the world in which it's not about nations but about cities. So that's how I very much perceive Germany. I feel very different in very different cities. Germany is very unlike Britain in that Britain has its financial hub, its cultural hub, its media industries and all the rest of it, all concentrated in one city, which is London. Despite the fact that the BBC moved some of the BBC to Manchester, that continues to be the case. Scotland, to some extent, has devolved some, but there used to be there used to be television studios and things in Edinburgh, but there isn't really much media there, and I couldn't have had a media career staying in Edinburgh. It just wouldn't have made sense. I had to go to London. But Germany is very different in that you have Hamburg and Cologne. Cologne is like an art city. Hamburg is a media city traditionally. Frankfurt is the financial city. Munich is beer and BMW. Berlin has traditionally been this weird wounded bird with one wing in communism and one wing in capitalism, but now is increasingly the administrative hub and the media hub and, of course, the art hub as well, sort of shared with Cologne, I would say, in that sense. And so you have this very much a city identity of the German cities all being, and South and North Germany also have this religious split between Catholic and Protestant, and also big political attitudinal differences, Berlin being a very liberal city traditionally and still to this day. So I feel at home in Berlin. Berlin is the city-state as far as I'm concerned. I would love there to be more city-states. I would love there to be, an independent state of New York and an independent state of San Francisco. And perhaps if Trump tries to grab power, that's what will happen. There will be these secessions of cities from the US, and perhaps Canada can inherit New York, for instance. Because the people, and London looks as if it would be happy to be an independent state within England, since its attitude to the Brexit question was so markedly different. I remember when I first moved to London in '84, I graduated from university in Aberdeen in '84, and I moved down to be with friends who had moved to London, my Greek and French friends, and they told me, they said, come down here because it's actually very left-wing down here. It's the most left-wing place, inner London, in the whole of Britain, and it's run by this guy Ken Livingstone from the GLC. Forget the Parliament buildings were for the rest of Britain, but London was governed by the GLC, which was Red Ken. So it's kind of like that in a lot of cities. You have a sort of socialistic mayor or a gay mayor. In Berlin's case, Paris's case, in the past anyway, and then you have the rest of the country, which just doesn't understand and doesn't share the attitudes of the big city. And you need those big cities because actually, as Richard Florida has shown in his studies of creativity and cities and the contribution of the creative class, what he calls the creative class, which is up to 30% of the population in his estimation, the contribution of that class to the economies of the nations that they are part of is enormous. I mean, if you look at the companies which America is now dependent on, its biggest tech companies, Google and Apple, are both very much the home of creative, liberal, often gay, left-leaning people, and they require the ambience. Mostly, although they've had campuses in sort of weird suburban Californian places, but they're putting their campuses in cities where those attitudes prevail and a certain liberalism prevails. Liberalism and trade, you see, this association between liberalism and trade is something to really pin your hopes on, because if we're living in a time when there's this anti-liberal attitude, it's going to have to be anti-trade as well. And what will happen to the world economy if you're not just anti-liberal but also anti-trade? If those two things go together, it's a pretty dire outlook. I mean, great eco-outlook, because it means the world's commercial output will diminish and there'll be less material waste, there'll be less materials produced, full stop. So anyway, who knows? But as I was saying, this idea of being half competent, I kind of identify with, not quite with that Fassbinder-esque character of Ali, who's the Moroccan immigrant who says, "Fear eats soul out," Angst essen Ziel auf. It was the title of his film about the immigrant who married an old lady played by Fassbinder's own mother. I'm not quite at that level of difference from German society. I'm a white European. I can even pronounce my schwas, because we say in Scottish as well. We talk about lochs and things like that. So we have parallels and overlaps with the language. But I do feel myself, I've got my bank account in Germany, I've got my boxes, all my possessions which are not here in Japan or in Germany. It's a bit strange that I should spend most of my time in these two countries which were Axis powers, and also Italy. I spent a lot of time in Venice and Italy, Venice and Milan, and it's kind of weird that I'm gravitating to the Axis powers, what were in the Second World War the Axis powers, but it's not weird on the other hand, because I think guilt is very important. I think it's super important that these countries had their moment of rash, fascistic disgrace, really, and have spent all the decades since repenting and recanting and unable to go into the fascist areas which now we see Britain and the US particularly going into, hopefully not France, touch wood, and other countries in Europe, because this guilt, this idea, this identification of Hitler with evil, it has been very important. And I think we're, in some sense, I just had the idea the other day, I thought, my God, in a way Hitler has won, because he's now identified himself so much with a kind of mean outlook on life that anybody who wants to appear mean, to whip up hatred and to appear mean, to kick some ass, in other words, to be a bully, is going to become Hitler. So Hitler may have been a brief mayfly phenomenon in the history of Germany. He's just a tiny little speck. But because he casts such a long shadow through history, he's having, in a sense, the last laugh right now, or a laugh. He's having a moment of laughter. Let's not call it the last laugh. Although they have advanced the doomsday clock by 2.5 minutes. We're very close to midnight now because we've put idiots in command, unfortunately. Disgraceful, shit-stirring idiots, hate-filled, shit-kicking idiots. Yeah, lost my thread there. Lost my thread at the end of the world, which is probably an appropriate place to lose it. But could I be a German? I don't know. Am I a Japanese? Oh, I was talking about the Axis powers. Why? I suppose it is this institutionalized guilt, which is super important in these countries, and I think it is very pervasive. In Japan, there is this. Not just a World War II related guilt. In fact, there's very little of that, as we know, or the fact that there is very little of that. There's been this scandal about APA hotels providing sort of doctored history texts in the bedrooms, and Chinese tourists are now boycotting this chain of Japanese hotels because they have these books which say Japan did nothing wrong in the Second World War. We had some, but it is the strong pervasive sense of guilt in Japan is basically expressed in sumimasen. The fact that you hear this so often, sumimasen, which means not just forgive me, but I cannot be forgiven. It is beyond your power to forgive what I've done because it's so bad, and bowing at the same time, the gestural accompaniment to it. And this is very deep, and you actually assume it yourself when you come into Japan. As a foreigner, you're even more unforgivable than a Japanese native, and so you end up saying either gomenasai or sumimasen, which are two forms of sorry or forgive me, a lot. In Germany also, it's not quite bowing everywhere, but there is a sense of we can't be mean because we're Germans, and Germans used to be mean at one point, or so. And in Italy, I don't know. I don't think Italy is marked by guilt. I think Italy is a swaggering, narcissistic country which is still rather corrupt and has a real north-south divide, and is also having problems with populism as a result of the huge influx of immigrants from Africa, because they're close to Africa. I don't know politically. Beppo Grillo, we'll have to see what he does. I like the fact that he disassociated himself from the alliance of right-wing parties that Nigel Farage's UKIP is part of, or was part of, is still part of. So that was an important gesture to make, because in some cases these populist parties, it's not so clear-cut whether they're left or right-leaning. And Beppe Grillo, I'm hoping, might become a left-leaning populist, like Syriza in Greece. So we have to see. There is still the possibility of redemption in these populist movements across Europe. I don't know what is the theme of my talk today. It was German. It was being a foreigner and the benefits of being a foreigner. Actually, something Paul Bowles talked about being this whole idyll of the beats being in Tangier. A city I might get to visit for the first time this year because I have a concert being booked in Alicante, which is down in South Spain, and it's a short train ride and then a short ferry trip to Tangier from there. So I might actually get to see the place I've been reading about in the William Burroughs biography, which I know is much more touristic now. But I've never been to Africa, not any point in Africa, so that would be interesting. But Paul Bowles, while living in Tangier, said that it's a privilege to be a foreigner and you can benefit from it, and it's something that one feels very strongly here in Japan because one is left alone in one's bubble. To be a foreigner here is to be respected but also neglected, and I don't mind that at all. It might be, if you were the wrong colour of foreigner, the wrong race or nationality of foreigner, it might also to be rejected here. To feel certainly more rejected, but because we're a novelty, it's still at the stage that Europe was at in say 500 years ago. There were black people in Europe who were considered novelties and actually became society successes, were portrayed by portraitists and entered courtly culture in many cases and became the favourites of kings, and in a slightly patronising way, but it was still a novelty, and it wasn't this proletarian sort of cheek by jowl feeling of we have to live with people who worship in mosques, and we don't like that, and the crucible of the contemporary problem with immigration. So we still have a margin of tolerance, I think, here in Japan, as long as we don't, rock the boat too much. Being an immigrant all one's life, or being an exile all one's life, I've basically been an exile for only about half of my life. But every time I left the UK and then came back, I felt somehow cheated of something, cheated of a life which should be mine. Being an exile has always held a certain glamour for me. And of course, this is me speaking from a position of privilege, because it could have been an awful experience and could still be an awful experience in some countries. We'll have to see as the attitude changes towards non-natives. We have to see how things go. As I say, I'm hoping that cities become almost like the city-states of Renaissance Italy, which I think were creative and interesting and had good trading relations with each other. That's a unit I'm kind of optimistic about. The nation-state itself, insofar as it's associated with right-wing populism, I hate. But if the nation-state could swing into a left-wing populism, I wouldn't mind that at all. Scotland, Iceland, these little left-wing countries. Why not? Why not be nationalist? As long as they affiliate with larger organisations as well, with Europe and whatever. Scandinavia, even. I would be happy for Scotland to join Scandinavia. Become like Finland, because we have a lot in common with Finland, actually. Fremdsprache, the foreign language, speaking a foreign language, speaking it inadequately and having to fish around. First of all, what are the words that I do know in that language? What are the words I don't know? That's already quite an interesting self-portrait, the fact that I've bothered to learn certain words and not others. It would be the same with Japanese. My German I call Ladendeutsch, which is shop German. It's also kind of restaurant German. That if you can master the menu and asking for things from the menu, or going to the shops and asking for things in the shops, then you can basically live in Germany. You also have some contractual stuff, but generally that's not frequent enough for you to have to worry about the language. You can look it up each time. Or banking stuff. I mean, I do online banking in German, and I can use Google Translate for the difficult bits. But generally, I understand those words. The pragmatic little areas. In Japan, it's konbini nihongo. You could say it's how to speak when you go to a shop or go to a restaurant. And also it's girl nihongo. It's kind of interesting because most of my contacts with Japanese people have been girlfriends. And I've learned a certain very girly way to talk, saying mo mukatsuko and mo yada, yamete. This kind of girl talk. I don't go around saying boku wa. I say, well, you leave the subject out actually most of the time. But I don't use this boy talk. I should have hung around more Japanese men to really speak like a man, but it is what it is.
Open University.